agency continues its work. Today we are talking about Ukraine in the rating doing business. Is it possible to get to top 50 countries in doing business rating in 80 days? Yulia Klymenko, Deputy Minister of Economic Development and Trade of Ukraine, will talk about that. Dear journalists, dear colleagues, we are here to discuss and to tell about what's happening with this rating doing business and about the situation of investment attractiveness of Ukraine, about the problems. We would like to draw your attention to the fact that little time is left and we need to do a lot and we need to work hard. We need to join our efforts so that foreign investors that look at Ukraine, look at different ratings, the investors look at these ratings to understand where Ukraine is moving. And it's not about what is the place of Ukraine in this rating, but in what is the trend. What's happening now with the rating doing business? The plan and the roadmap were developed by the Cabinet of Ministers, by our colleagues from the Office of Better Regulation, our colleagues from the Ministry of Justice. The plan was approved in December 2015. Now we are working hard on drafting the legislation, which needs to be passed so that Ukraine gets to top 20. We need to pass about 40 regulations, not just draft laws, but different regulations and bylaws. These are the steps we need to do to improve the business environment in Ukraine. 23 steps are primary steps. That is what we need to do, what we need to pass, and what we need to implement by the end of May 2016. Most of them are draft laws on introducing amendments to the existing legislation. We and our colleagues have drafted 23 draft laws. Some of them have been submitted to the Verkhovna Rada. Now 11 of them are registered in the Verkhovna Rada. 2 approved as the basis. One draft out of 11 was included 6 times into the agenda of the parliament, but it hasn't been considered a single time. All other drafts are registered. Some of them are at the committees, some are already ready to be considered in the parliament. 12 are drafted and they can be registered in the parliament. That is the statistical data, because we have just 80 days left, but talking about working days, from March till the end of May, we have only 25 working days when the Verkhovna Rada will be working. So basically we have very little time left. We would like to request our colleagues in the parliament and the Cabinet of Ministers so that we altogether demonstrate that Ukraine does have a potential, that Ukraine goes up in the rating, so it becomes the positive signal. If we do not give any positive signals, then investors, especially in the background, on the background of what's happening in the country will not come to the country. So this is one of the instruments to demonstrate the attractiveness of Ukraine, to give the positive signal to investors who can enter Ukraine. And I'm talking not just about foreign investors, but domestic as well. I would like to give the floor to my colleagues who will talk in more detail about doing business rating, what needs to be done, so that we together can show some results.
I would like to invite Natalia Sevostianova, first Deputy Minister of Justice of Ukraine. Thank you for this opportunity. As Natalia mentioned, the rating itself is not our objective per se. The ministries and the government's objective is to improve the everyday life of people, to improve the well-being of people, to improve healthcare services, and the conditions for SMEs. But the improvement of welfare in general could not be done without improving the situation in the economy. And our role is to show that we have prospects for growth, that we have much space for economic growth, and to attract investors who might bring necessary resources into the economy. That's why we try to understand how we can simplify life for both ordinary citizens and small businesses. Last year, the Ministry of Justice has implemented several online registers and online services allowing to do some legal services very quickly. This immediately had shown how easy it's to register a new business, how easy it is to get all necessary certificates from pension fund, from local administration, from tax service, etc. Now you can just come to just one point, one place where you just submit your request and some necessary documents, and this could be done very quickly. And introduction of these online services immediately allowed Ukraine to go 40 positions up in the doing business rating, in the easiness of doing business rating. Of course, that's not enough. And looking at the statistics of court proceedings which are pending, which are started, and at the percentage of the court verdicts implementation, we came to decision that we need to reform the state enforcement system. Of course, and we decided to introduce private court enforcement implementation system. Of course, the most important issues related to involvement of underage children, related to evictions, they will remain within the scope of the state enforcement service. But some functions will be delegated to the private enforcement system. Of course, this should be done in line with the general judiciary reform in order to ensure the lawfulness of the decisions. Also, I would like to mention such a thing as introducing the electronic electronic assignment of cases between judges, and that would allow us to go up 75 positions in such a section of the rating as implementation of court verdicts. Also, we have big space for cooperation, and we are very eager to cooperate with civil society, with public. If you have any ideas how the situation in legislation in those issues might be changed for the better, we invite you to come to us. We are open for cooperation. It is important to understand that in order to be sure that all the improvements which we made and that are reflected in this rating, we should intensify our work now, because there is some deadline. We are very grateful to all our partners who allowed us to create the Office of Reform Coordination Office, and each ministry now is able to have a group of experts inside the ministry whose work is entirely aimed at the implementation of this reform and these improvements aimed at doing business rating. I invite Oleksiy Honcharuk from the Efficient Governance Office. Thank you.
This rating is the marker that many investors of the world follow. The general situation looks as that the government, the Ministry of Economy, the Ministry of Justice has been working very well during the last 3 months. There was a map developed which had 43 steps. Last December, there was a resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers passed. We have executed it by 90%, so the ministry has done its homework. Now these drafts are to be supported in the Verkhovna Rada, but your objective is to explain to the members of the parliament that this is a very important work. We now expect the parliamentarians to work hard. We are ready to cooperate. There's a group that cooperates these issues because many of the issues are interagency, and they refer to the Ministry of Energy, Ministry of International Development and Economic Development, and so on. So the message is, it's up to the Verkhovna Rada. Dear members of parliament, you have already 11 registered drafts. Others are ready to be registered. So please get involved into this work. Let's promote this work. Let's prepare it as soon as possible, because we have only less than 1 month left. When people say that that's just rating, that's just show off, that doesn't correspond to the reality, because the best practices are collected. As Natalia correctly said, when we are talking about registration, now the issue of registration by the Ministry of Justice has been addressed, but now we still have this issue about registration with the Ministry of Finance. For that, we need the law, and a lot of work is to be done. So we call upon you, please join this promotion campaign, disseminate this information so that the members of parliament and the public understand that the ministries have done all. Now we need to cooperate closely with the parliament to finish it. Thank you.
Чи є запитання?
Any questions?
Константин Симоненко, UBR.
Konstantin Simonenko, UBR. Have you assessed the volume of investments which could be attracted maybe similarly to other countries if Ukraine goes up 10 or 20 positions in the rating goes up? Now the Ministry of Finance has changed the GDP growth from 2% to 1%. What are the forecasts of the Ministry of Economy? So everything related to macro indicators. There's no secret in that. All the information is open as to volume of investments that come together with doing business. We saw different assessments. 10 points give about $600 million investments dollars. But again, these are approximate indicators. We have this specific situation when we have aggression in the eastern Ukraine, annexation of Crimea. Investors are looking at the security of the investments, not just at certain macroeconomic indicators. As to macroeconomic indicators, you know, in the budget they were approved as 2% growth of GDP in 2016, inflation 12%. We have not reviewed the inflation indicator this year. We see deflation from the beginning of the year. We have not reviewed the forecasts. We believe the forecast, the Ministry of Finance gives 1% for the first half year, maybe the first half year, because we have this difficult situation with transit, with embargo, the trade war that we have with Russian Federation that worsens our balance and our indicators. But we do hope during 6 or 12 months we'll be able to improve some other, to organize some other logistical channels which will go not across Russia, and we'll be talking about more detailed forecast in the result of the first quarter of 2016. Maybe it will get worse, but the situation is not that bad to radically review the macroeconomic indicators. We hope that we will renew our work with the IMF, and in the nearest future we'll be able to say when we'll be able to again use the IMF program, which will influence the macroeconomic indicators. We don't have a pessimistic view on 2016. We do believe that the economy will start growing. We hope that there will be new jobs created. In 2015, there were some investments made. There are some plans to make investments in 2016. In Western Ukraine, there were projects signed with some production companies. We see that we do have import substitution in Ukraine. We start developing capacities inside the country. So we do hope that with the help of our domestic money and foreign investments, the situation will improve. As it was stated in the end of 2015, we expect to get about $5 billion of investments in 2016.
Further questions? Quite often we used to hear from business, they simplify registration. You can open a business within several hours, 3 hours, for example, but just try to close it and you would find out that it's almost impossible. You need another 3 years to do this. Whether you plan to tackle this problem. Quite often people perceive economics that this is about figures and that legislation is some separate thing. But in general, the legislation is a thing upon which our life depends. And for example, about crediting. We need a special law following the international example, which would allow the banks to strengthen the pledges for those loans and to be sure that loans will be paid back. And another example is how to act for an enterprise in the greatly monopolized environment. Another example, the law on minority shareholders and the protection of the rights of those minorities. Currently in Ukraine, the situation in this issue is rather contradictory, and we are now thinking how to strengthen responsibility of the enterprise administration before these minor shareholders. Recently, I heard from my friend, I've been registered as an entrepreneur, as a businessman, but now I have problems that I cannot be registered as a VAT taxpayer. And this shows that it is more or less simple to introduce improvements and changes at the level of one agency, one ministry, etc. But when it comes to coordination between several ministries, the issue becomes quite more complicated. I have here the full package of the legislative initiatives and novelties which were planned to introduce. And looking at this package, you easily can see that these are interrelated areas. For example, new construction and new development. For example, construction area is very demanding in terms of special background, special education, while in Ukraine there is no obligatory requirement to have such a background. And thus, this package of new legislative initiatives will bring us in line with the international standards in the area of doing business. I would like to refer to what you mentioned about easiness of opening business and the difficulties with the closure of business. I had an experience in my career when I had been trying to close one business during 7 years, and all that delays happened because of the necessity to make this final tax inspection of all the documentation. That's why we have submitted the draft law. I do not remember its number, but this is that very law which 6 times was attempted to be inserted into the agenda. It provides for limited time schedule for closure of small businesses. For example, in Western practices, they have, in terms of the bankruptcy, they have such a thing as the second chance. When any enterprise approaches to the point of bankruptcy, it is provided with the second chance to reload the business, to start from the beginning and to survive. And the statistic proves that around 20% of SMEs use this second chance possibility. As of today, the bankruptcy procedure is already improved. It is the draft law is in the parliament, and now the parliament has to review it because it is a big problem for the business. Those who wish to close the enterprises, they should be able to do this. As of today, this is very cumbersome and effort-consuming procedure. Further questions? Could you... I'm Alexander Dmitruk, by the way. Could you please disclose a secret? What are the most painful issues in each package, which you described from the economic point of view, from the legal point of view? On our side, we see the following difficulties with the passage of the law. These are all the laws related to anti-monopoly aspects. For example, switching to the electric grids. The next is about the tax SMEs, the real property tax and shareholders tax going to the local budgets. For example, we found out that 1.5 billion hryvnia disappeared, and when the developers paid this tax to local authorities, this suggests that there is a huge corruption component here. Actually, this money goes to the pockets of some local bureaucrats. This is their discretion whether to pay 4% or 10% of special contribution from developer to the local budget. Actually, we have submitted the draft law which states that there should be a unified 4% contribution from the developer to the local budget, and this unification would allow us to limit the burden, tax burden on developers. On the other hand, the local authorities, of course, have to get some contributions, some taxes from developers to develop local infrastructure. Because as of today, local authorities had received new responsibilities. There is the third component in this equation. When any investor goes to, for example, some region, like, for example, Chernihiv region, they will compare the local taxes in different districts and decide what amount of labor force is available, what payroll tax they should pay, what VAT tax they should pay, what corporate income tax they should pay. That is, they won't pay attention at just the property contribution, which is part of the doing business rating. That is, we have now more complicated problems with the connection to electricity grids, for example. This is a real reflection how natural monopolies try to keep their monopoly position, while for SMEs this is a vital, crucial issue, whether you can get this connection to the electric grid. That's why the draft law which we submitted to the parliament about connection to electric grids, it's not just to improve our position in doing business, but to simplify life for SMEs.
Talking about difficulties, do we have any disagreement with the MPs on different issues? No, we have discussions in the committee, but we don't have a problem which is to be regulated. But is it easy to then pass the law? No. Sometimes the ministry would give away the function. We were giving down the functions to local authorities, to notaries, to accredited entities who can do some functions. For 8 months, we've been fighting for these laws in the Verkhovna Rada. Another example, in the beginning of the last year, even we were collecting on the initiatives which were related to the Ministry of Justice. We got it into one draft law, even called it for improvement of the rating of Ukraine doing business. We got the support groups, Petrenko, Abramovich's, Pivovarsky, with all the deputies. We were going to factions. We were explaining what it is, why do we need it, let's vote. There were always different answers. We don't understand that. We'll look at that later. Then there was there's some English word here, doing business, it has to be renamed, and this way this draft law had no success last year, even though it could have shown great result even this year. Some changes could have become a serious impetus. So we need to work hard to pay a lot of attention to interaction with the Verkhovna Rada, because lack of communication could lead to the situation when someone mentions them and then no one goes back to them. Thank you. The last question. If you have no questions, then thank you. And let's continue it in the